The rattle of the wheels has a particular rhythm tonight. Not the ordinary rattle I've heard 1,000 times, 10,000 times, ta-dum, 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 but something slower, something melancholic, something that draws me back to a time that no longer exists except in my head. Outside, a small village drifts past, just a handful of lights, yellow and warm and so very far away. And the moon, oh, the moon hangs high, so very high, almost directly above me, and its light, that silver, infinite light, falls across meadows and forests, falls on my window, and it reminds me of something. Suddenly I'm there again. I'm young again. I'm on a different path, at a different forest edge, but it's the same moon looking down on me, just as it did then. It was summer, many years ago. More years than I care to count, more years than I wish to count. I was not the old man I am now. I was young, barely more than a boy, really. And there was a girl I loved. We walked along the forest edge, not on the road, not on the ordinary path, but on a narrow little trail between the dark wood and the green meadow. The meadow was silver green, thick with grass that rose nearly to our knees, soft beneath our feet. And the forest was dark, very dark, a wall of shadow, but not frightening, not dangerous. It was as if the wood protected us both, as if it knew we were there together and understood. The moon was like tonight, bright, impossibly bright, silver, infinite. And its light fell across the grass and turned it to silver, real silver, as though the meadow itself were luminous, as though it were made of light from within. The girl, I can barely remember her face now. It's faded like a photograph left out in the sun for too long. But I remember with absolute clarity the way she gazed at the moon. Not with words, no, not with words at all. Only with her eyes, with a wonder and astonishment so pure I could barely bear it, almost painful in its purity. She was perhaps 16 or 17. I was perhaps 18 or 19. We weren't meant to be together. It was absolutely forbidden. Different families, different houses, different places and roles in the world. And if we'd been found out, it would have been a disaster. But the night, the forest, the moonlight, these gave us a special place, a world outside the world, where none of that mattered, where the differences didn't count, where we could simply be two people together. We didn't go far. Not to any house, not to some secret place. Just a few minutes' walk. We walked only until we found the perfect tree, an ancient oak at the forest's edge, large and strong, its branches stretched over the meadow like protective arms. And we sat down, not close together, no, that would have been too visible, too obvious, but not far apart either, just the right distance. And we watched as the moonlight transformed the entire landscape before our eyes. Everything was different in the moonlight. The fear, the ordinary fear of being discovered, became beauty. The loneliness we both carried became togetherness. And time, time became something entirely different, something impossible. Not something that passed, not something that consumed us, but something that stood still, simply stood still and stayed with us. She said something, I can't quite remember what, the years have blown it away, but it was about the moon, about the night, about the way everything looked different, smelled different, sounded different. She pointed at something in the sky, a star, the North Star, something, and I tried to understand what she meant, and I said something back, something I thought wise then, but is lost now, lost forever. And then we said nothing more. We stopped talking. We simply sat, and we were present, completely present, here on this meadow, under this moon. And we were happy, so very happy. That's all I truly remember. Not a kiss, though I wish I could recall precisely whether there was a kiss, a moment, but just that endless presence, that stillness which wasn't empty but full. The moon lighting us both, and the meadow silver, silver as nothing else could be, and the forest protecting us, knowing we were there. I remember her scent. Yes, it's strange, but it's true. She wore no perfume. No, that would have been impossible for a girl of her time, her family. But she smelled of hay, of fresh grass, of the air of the meadow that had soaked into her dress. And I remember breathing in that scent, breathing it in as though I were storing it for the years ahead, for the loneliness I knew would follow. I remember the way the moonlight shone on her skin, like a ghost almost, like something not quite real, but a projection from another life, another time. And I thought to myself then, without the words to think it, that I wanted to be trapped in this moment forever, forever, not wanting to live any further, just staying here. I don't know how long we sat there. An hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. At night, time is different. It changes, becomes something new. It could have been just 5 minutes, 5 short minutes, and yet it would have felt like an eternity, like a whole lifetime. Or it could have been all night, many hours, and I wouldn't have noticed, wouldn't have known that time was passing. The sky was still black, the moon was still above. But then came light. False light, artificial, that terrible orange light of a street lamp, from somewhere far away, perhaps from a house approaching or a road drawing nearer. And with that light came the world back, reality returned. The differences between us, the families, the class, the differences, the barriers, all came back. And we had to go, we had to return, back into the world where we couldn't be together. I never saw her again after that night. Not in that way. Not alone under the moon, not beneath our tree, with the meadow silver before us. She married someone from her family, someone appropriate, someone who was allowed. And I went out into the world, young and lost. I got on trains like this one. I traveled, I wandered. I met other people, lived other lives. But I never stopped searching for that forest edge. Everywhere I go, everywhere this train takes me, wherever there's a dark wood and a silver meadow and a moon, a bright moon, I look and I think, is this the place? Is this the forest edge? Is it here? And sometimes, when the moon is particularly bright, when its light is silver and infinite, I feel her beside me again. She's sitting next to me, young, wonderful, still. And for a moment, just a moment, I'm young again, 20 again, back at the forest edge beneath our tree. But that was long ago. The train carries on, the rails thunder, the moon sinks slowly across the sky, growing ever slower. The village with its handful of lights is gone now. There's only forest, only night. And I'm nearly asleep. The memory blurs, becomes a dream. The forest edge becomes a dream. The girl becomes a dream. And I sit here, alone on the train, remembering or dreaming. And the boundary between remembering and dreaming grows dark. My eyes grow heavy. So heavy. The moon still shines, but its light is warm now, turning golden, becoming the light of my own sleep. And I'm there again, at the forest edge. But now I'm also here, on the train, and both are equally real, both are equally true. The forest, and the meadow, and the moon, and the girl beside me, and the silence. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. The train sinks into sleep. The wheels sink into another time. The night takes me, gently, so gently, into the dream, where the forest edge remains forever. I met a baker on a train from Bratislava to Žilina on a morning deep in winter, cold, gray, dark gray. with snow on the fields and along the roadsides. She sat beside me with a large, heavy basket full of bread. Real bread, mind you, not the light, modern bread of commercial bakeries, but old-fashioned farm bread, dense and dark, with a crispy, textured crust that smelled of sourdough and roasted grain, a smell that at once carried me back to my childhood. She was a very old woman, small, bent with age. Her hands were white with flour, not white like paint or dirt, but white like ghosts, permanently engraved from the flour, permanently colored by decades of baking. She told me openly and without hesitation that she rises every single night at 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes earlier, sometimes before midnight, to make the bread for her village. A village with only 100 people, but one that belongs to her, you might say. "The dough must absolutely know that you love it," she said, her eyes fixed intently on mine. That's the greatest secret of baking. You can't simply mix flour and water and think that magically bread will appear. That's not right. The dough must feel that you understand it, that you speak to it, that it matters. I speak with my dough every night, really speak, not just say words. I tell it about my day, about my thoughts, about my dreams, about my family. And the dough answers me, not with words, but with its smell, with the way it rises, with the golden color of the crust, with the way it looks at me like a child. She showed me carefully one of the loaves from the basket. It was still warm. "This one is from this morning, exactly 3 o'clock when I woke. I rose, like every day, without an alarm. My body knows it, and I went into the little bakery beside my house, an old building that's already 100 years old. The oven was already warm. I keep it warm all night. It costs energy, but it's essential, it's proper. The dough was perfectly ready, had been rising overnight slowly, was ripe, was ready. And I shaped it, not with machines, no, that would hurt the dough, but with my own hands, these old hands that have touched so much dough. And I placed it in the oven with love, with respect. And then I waited, 40 minutes. And while I waited, I made coffee, and I sat, and I think. The smell, oh, the smell is always the best. The smell of the bread growing dark, caramelizing, living. The smell tells me personally, that everything is right, that it was a good night. "There aren't many left like me," she said quietly, her voice full of weight and sorrow. "Young people these days, they absolutely don't want to get up at 3 in the morning to work at a dark oven. They want careers in the city, quick money, modern things. My own grandson, he's intelligent, very intelligent, and he won't make bread. He wants to be an engineer or work with computers. He says to me that it's too much work, that there's not enough money, that the market is dead. And he's right, technically. But I think, what's really more important? The money, the quick money, or the soul, the heart, the spirit of the people who eat my bread? The bread isn't just food. The bread is love. The bread is prayer." She leaned toward me, and the smell of the bread grew even more intense, surrounded us like a little world of its own. "You see," she said, "the dough, it must rise at night. The best fermentation, that happens in the dark, when nobody's watching, when the dough thinks it's alone. I speak with the dough, but I also let it rest, let it be alone too. That's the secret, not controlling everything all the time. Sometimes you have to let go, have to trust the dough, have to accept that the magic has its own time. The dough knows what it must do. A person can only watch, wait, be patient. And then, when the time is right, not a minute earlier, not later, then I know it. My body knows it. I wake without an alarm, my eyes open, my heart says, now. And she showed me her eyes, which were old, surrounded by wrinkles, but the pupils were sharp, dark brown, alive. These eyes have never needed glasses, not in 70 years. They look only at the bread, day after day. They know when the dough is perfect, when the crust is golden enough, when the water has evaporated. You develop new eyes, you see. You become one with the craft, and then you don't need to think anymore. You become the bread. The baker and the bread, we're the same thing in the end, after so many years. The baker told me of a particular bread she once made, many years ago, when she was still young and full of doubt. She'd forgotten everything, the time, the temperature, the amount of salt. The dough looked ruined, wrong, impossible. But she put it in the oven anyway, and from that mistake, from that carelessness, came the best bread of her life, a bread that the people in the village still remember, still speak of. The mistake, she said, was a gift. The mistake taught me that control isn't the answer, that trust is more important, that sometimes things get better when they go wrong, when you let them go. The baker leaned slowly back and closed her eyes, as if carrying a great weight. "I'm 70 years old," she said, her voice distant, dreaming. 70 years, rising every single night, going to the dark oven, making the bread, shaping the dough, waiting. It's my whole life, 70 years. And you know what? I'm not tired. I'm not tired of life, of work, of the nights. I'm only tired of the fear, you see, that when I stop, when I'm old and I die, and that will be soon, I feel it, that then nobody will make real bread, that my village, this village that I love, will only eat industrial bread, imported from somewhere, from some great cold factory, bread without love, without soul. And that's the fear that comes to me at night. Her hands, resting in her lap, opened slowly as if she were giving me an invisible gift. "The sourdough," she said, her voice growing softer, more intimate. "I received it from my mother, and she had it from her mother, and back, probably 100 years or more. The same sourdough, the same microorganisms, the same life. It's not just a starter for bread. It's an inheritance. It's history. It's my grandmother living in this sourdough, baked into every loaf. If the sourdough dies, if I don't feed it, if I forget it, then a whole life dies, a whole line, a whole piece of history. And I can't allow that. I will never allow it." She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. "But here," she said, gesturing to the basket of bread, "I still have 8 loaves. They're for the community center, for the celebration on Christmas Day. And the people will eat them, and they will know that it's real bread. They will know that an old woman on a cold night with her own hands made this bread for them. And that matters. That's more than money. That's love in bread form." The train drove through the Slovak winter landscape. Snow, villages, fires in chimneys. The baker leaned her head against the window and sighed, a slow, quiet sigh. "In 3 hours I'm home in my village," she said. "And tomorrow morning at 3 o'clock I'll wake up again. The dough is waiting for me, the people are waiting for me. The fire of the oven is waiting. And I'll wake, and I'll make the bread. I'll love the bread, and the bread will know my love. And that is enough." Her eyes grew heavy, and she fell asleep, her head tilted against the cold window. And I looked at the bread in the basket, warm, golden, perfect. And I thought of all those nights when she stood alone at the oven with her hands, with her love. And the train rushed on, ta-dam, ta-dam, into the night, into the village, into the snow, slowly, so very slowly, into sleep, where the bread would smell forever. I met an old draftsman on a train from Katowice to Kraków. It was autumn, a cool, grey time, and the streets were wet with rain. The draftsman sat with a thick sketchbook, drawing, his hands moving quickly, as though they knew what to do without his mind having to interfere. He was very old, with wrinkles as deep as rivers in his face, and his eye, one eye, the other hidden behind thick spectacles, glowed with a kind of fire that wasn't old at all, but young, endlessly young. "I draw the streets," he said, looking at me. "The cold streets of Kraków. The stones are old, older than me, older than all of us. And to draw every stone is a form of love. When you draw a stone, you must first see it, really see it, not just with your eyes, but with your soul. And when you see it, you know it, and you love it, and then you can draw it." He paused and showed me a particular sketch, an old door, extraordinarily detailed. "This door here, I've drawn it 44 times, 44 times, because each time I understood it better. The first drawing was just a door, but the 44th, that's a door that is my whole life. That is all the doors I ever opened or closed." The old draftsman looked at me, and his gaze was intense, penetrating. "You're probably thinking I'm mad, drawing a door 44 times. But no, that's not madness. That's patience. That's love. If you truly love something, you can draw it endlessly. You can always see new things in it. You can always go deeper. The door, it shows me something new every day. The scratches, the cracks, how time has worked on it. And I draw all of it. The door is a document of time, of life, of change." He showed me a sketchbook. Hundreds of drawings, streets, gates, old windows, a woman with a shopping basket, a child running. All of it was in pencil, done quickly, alive, breathing. "This is my life," he said. 50 years in this city, and I'm still drawing. I'll draw until I'm dead, and after death, who knows? Perhaps I'll be drawing still." I flipped through the pages, and each page was a window into his soul. I saw the development. The early drawings were uncertain, hesitant, almost shy. But over the years, over the decades, they became more assured, freer, yet at the same time more detailed. The newer drawings, those were masterpieces. They were music done with pencil. "How many books have you filled?" I asked. The draftsman laughed quietly. 88, he said. 88 sketchbooks, each one stuffed full of drawings, hundreds, thousands of drawings. If each drawing takes 10 minutes, then I've spent tens of thousands of hours drawing the world, loving the world through the tip of my pencil." His voice became quieter, nostalgic. "You know, when I was young, I wanted to be an artist, a great artist. I wanted galleries, wanted fame, wanted people to buy my pictures and hang them on walls. But that didn't happen. Life was too hard, the world too cruel, the time too short. And so I simply stayed on the streets, drawing the things I saw. And do you know what? It's better. It's much better. Because I'm not drawing for galleries, not for prizes, not for fame. I'm drawing for love, for the pure, simple love of the things I see. People think that art belongs in galleries, in museums, for money. But that's wrong. Art is for love. Art is loving the world, seeing it, understanding it, honoring it, preserving it. And the streets of Kraków, they deserve honor. They've carried so many people, so much history, so many dreams. They've seen blood, tears, laughter, hope. They need to be drawn before they crumble, before time takes them, before they're forgotten, before nobody remembers they ever existed. We drove through the landscape, forests and fields, and the draftsman drew on, never stopping. "My grandfather was an artist too," he said quietly. "But he had to stop during the war. Art was dangerous. The soldiers, they didn't like art. They didn't like beauty. They liked only orders, only violence, only destruction. My grandfather, he hid his pictures, hid his drawings, hid his soul in boxes beneath the earth." The old draftsman stopped drawing for a moment, and his gaze grew distant, shadowed by memory. "I was a child, and I saw him weep because he couldn't draw. The artist's hunger, that's a terrible illness. If you're an artist and you can't create, then you die a little every day." "But I didn't stop. I drew what I could, in hiding, on scraps of paper, on the backs of old newspapers. The soldiers, I wasn't old enough for them to notice. I was just a boy with a pencil. And so I drew, secretly, quietly, the streets, the walls, the people passing by. I drew to survive. I drew to remember. And then, when the war was over, my grandfather found my drawings, and he wept. But this time they were tears of joy. 'You did it,' he said to me. 'You kept drawing. That's the most important thing. That is life itself.' These sketchbooks," he said, and gestured to the stack beside him. "They'll go into a museum after I die. My daughter promised. She understands how important it is. She understands what her father did all these years. And then people will look at them, will flip through my life, will see how a man lived, how a man saw the world." His voice became solemn, almost sacred. 100 years from now, 200 years from now, Krakow won't look like this anymore. The streets will change, the houses will fall, new ones will be built. But in these books, Krakow will be eternal, will be frozen, will be preserved for everyone who comes. And that's enough. That's my legacy. Not money, not fame, not a great painting in a museum. But these records, this love in pencil, hundreds of books full of my hand, my eye, my heart. That's immortality, isn't it? Not like the great artists who go down in history, but solid, real, personal. A man who loved his city and expressed that love in millions of strokes, in millions of pencil tips that wore away as I drew, as I loved." His eyes grew weaker, and he leaned back. "The streets are waiting for me," he whispered. "When I reach Krakow, I'll draw again. The rain will make the stones dark, and I'll see how the moisture changes the colors, and I'll draw." He opened his hand and showed me his pencil, completely worn down, barely possible to hold, but still his tool, still his best friend in this whole life. "This pencil," he said with reverence, "it's as old as I am. We've aged together, lived together, seen and recorded the world together. If I drop it, if it falls to dust, then perhaps I'm finished too. But until then I keep drawing, steadfast, tireless. I'll always draw. That's my task, my joy, my life, my love. That's the reason I wake in the morning, why I breathe, why I exist. Not to become rich, not to become famous, but to see, to show, to remember, to hold the world, one pencil stroke after another, one drawing after another, one book after another. Ta-dam, ta-dam. The wheels and the stones and the love, all together, in one image, forever. The rattle of the wheels has brought me back tonight, far back, to a time that no longer exists. A horse. I saw it from the window, a brown horse standing beside a barn. and at once I was a child again. It was winter long ago, and the snow lay deep on the roads. My grandfather had a carriage, a horse-drawn carriage with 2 horses, one brown and one gray, and every winter he would take me into town. My mother was ill and I had to visit her, but I was happy because I was allowed to go with grandfather. The journey was long, hours, and the horses trotted, not quickly but rhythmically, and I sat beside my grandfather and we said nothing. Just the sound of hooves, the snorting of horses, the creaking of the carriage's wooden frame, and sometimes the wind. My grandfather was a large man, calm, wise, and his presence beside me was enough. I didn't need to speak. I only needed to be beside him and to know I was safe. The horses' coats were thick and warm, and sometimes I saw breath rising from their nostrils, little clouds of warmth in the cold. The brown one had a white blaze on his forehead, like a small stream running across his face. I watched everything, every movement, every step. The horses came on, slowly but surely, and their manes blew in the wind. Sometimes the brown one would turn and look at me, and I saw in his eyes a kind of understanding, as though he knew I was sad, that my mother was ill, that this journey mattered. The carriage swayed back and forth, and I leaned against my grandfather, and the rhythm of the wheels and hooves became a song. The snow was so deep it covered the carriage wheels halfway up, and sometimes the carriage would get stuck, and my grandfather would have to climb down and help. And I watched him trying to free the carriage, speaking to the horses, not in words, but with his voice, soothing. And the horses understood him. They pulled, and the carriage came free, and we could move on. And my grandfather brushed the snow from his shoulders and sat beside me again. And that was all. No words, just presence. I remember his hands, large, rough, full of scars from work. His fingers were red with cold, but he never complained. He held the reins with a firm hand, and the horses listened to him. There was a language between him and the animals, a kind of understanding older than words. He knew every hill on that route, knew where the path became dangerous, where you had to slow. And when the wind grew too strong, he'd lean forward and shield me with his body. His coat smelled of horse and leather and something that was purely grandfather. I've longed to feel that smell again. I remember the moment we reached the town. The streets were full of people and cars. It was already quite a modern town, and the horse carriage seemed ancient, unreal, like a ghost from the past. But my grandfather urged the horses on swiftly, confidently, and people looked at us. They saw an old man and a boy in a horse carriage, and I think they thought we were poor. But we weren't poor. We were rich. We had a carriage, we had horses, we had the road carrying us together. You know, I've often wondered why these moments were so important. It wasn't because we were going somewhere. It was because we were together. My grandfather and I. The snow, the horses, the carriage, those were just the frame for something deeper. An understanding between two people, a grandfather and his grandson. That love doesn't lie in words. It lies in closeness, in safety, in trusting that the other won't leave you, that the world outside this carriage might be dark and dangerous, but here, in this moment, everything is still. Everything is enough. And you know what's strange? My memories from that time aren't as clear as I'd like them to be. I can't quite remember his face. I can't remember what he looked like. But I remember the feelings. I remember the feel of his hand on my head. I remember the safety. And that's enough. That's more than enough. The feelings are the truth. The memories you store in your body, not in your mind, those are the important ones. And when I travel now, when I hear the wheels, those feelings come back, and my grandfather is with me again. And time has no power over us anymore. My mother died a year later, and I never saw the horse carriage again. My grandfather died, and the carriage was sold, and the horses too. They became part of the past, like so much that I loved. But now, so many years later, on the train, with a different motion, with different wheels beneath me, I'm there again. I'm a child again. And the forest drifts past, and the snow falls, and I hear the hoofbeats of the horses, and my grandfather sits beside me and tells me that everything will be well. It's strange how time works. A smell, a sound, the rattle of a train, and suddenly you're there again. You're sitting beside someone you loved and who died long ago. You feel their presence, as real as it was then, and you know that the impossible is true. Time isn't linear. It's a circle. It's a dream. And every time I step into a train, every time the wheels begin to rattle, I'm riding in that carriage. I'm still that small boy, and my grandfather is still beside me, and the world is still full of snow and hope. The horses know where they're going, he told me. They don't need to see, they only feel. And they know the road. They've traveled it 1,000 times. You can trust them. You can stretch out and sleep, and the horses will bring you home. And I did. I trusted the horses, and I slept, my head on his shoulder, and the carriage rocked me into sleep like a lullaby made of snow and hoofbeats and love. That's what I couldn't forget. Those words. The horses will bring you home. And I believed him. A child always believes his grandfather. A child trusts the horses, trusts the snow, trusts the night, trusts the carriage. And yes, the horses brought me home. We always arrived. But more than that, the horses brought me to my mother. They brought me to a place where I was loved. And now, so many decades later, I understand that my grandfather wasn't just talking about horses. He was talking about destiny, about trust, about the fact that you don't have to control everything, that sometimes you can simply go along, that there are forces greater than ourselves that carry us where we need to be. Now I'm old, like my grandfather, and I travel by train, not by horse carriage. But the motion is the same, the feeling is the same. The wheels sing the song of hoofbeats, and I'm there again in the carriage, safe, loved, carried home. And somewhere, in another time, a child sits beside his grandfather and trusts the horses, and the snow falls, and everything is quiet. Everything is well. The carriage sways, the hooves clatter, and I'm not alone. The train wheels sing the same song, and I listen. I hear my grandfather's voice telling me that everything will be well, that the journey is a blessing, that love never dies, it only transforms. Ta-dam, ta-dam, into sleep, into the past, into love. I met an old man on a train from Debrecen to Szeged, and it was spring. The windows were open, and warm air streamed in. The man was very old, bent with age, with hands that looked like old tools. He carried a rucksack, and in that rucksack, I saw it because he opened it, was a collection of metal pieces, old kettles, pans, pots, all bent, all broken. "I'm a tinsmith," he said. "The last one, I think. In my country, perhaps in the whole world." A tinsmith. I had to ask what the word meant. He laughed, a deep, warm laugh. "It's an old trade, a very old trade. We travel about to villages, to markets, to houses, and we repair kettles. Metal gets bent, pots get holes, and before they were thrown away, people brought them to the tinsmith, and the tinsmith, with his tools, with his hands, with his knowledge, repairs them. The kettle lives again, and the family has their kettle back, can cook again, can eat again, can live again. He showed me his hands. They were full of scars, full of cuts, of hammer marks, of decades of hard work. These hands, they're not young, but they still know what to do. They remember. The old man opened his rucksack and showed me his tools, a hammer of wood and steel, 2 smooth wooden blocks, a chisel, pliers, everything very old, everything very simple, but everything exactly right, everything perfect for the work. "That's all I need," he said with pride, touching each tool lovingly. "That's all my grandfather needed. That's all my great-grandfather needed. The tradition. It's not in expensive tools, not in modern machines, but in knowledge, in patience, in love for the metal, for the kettle. If you love the kettle, if you treat it as alive, if you understand that it has a soul, then you know how to heal it, how to bring it back to life." "I'm 77 years old," he said, "and I still work. But there aren't many customers. People buy new kettles, new pots, everything plastic, everything disposable. They throw the old ones away without thinking. Why repair? It's faster, it's easier, it's cheaper. But I still repair. I go from village to village. I'm traveling through Hungary now. I've been in Romania and Serbia, and I wait for someone to have a broken kettle, for someone to still believe in the old way." His gaze grew wistful. "Sometimes you wait days, sometimes weeks, sometimes a whole month. But there's always someone, somewhere, who needs a kettle, an old woman who doesn't have much money, who won't give up her grandmother's kettle. And then I come, and I repair, and the woman weeps because she's grateful, because the kettle is whole again, because the memory is whole again." He told me of his last repair, 2 weeks ago, in a small village near Budapest. An old woman had a large copper kettle, over 50 years old, an heirloom from her mother. The kettle had a big hole, was almost impossible to repair. But the tinsmith, this man with the old hands, he worked on it for 3 days. Every day he came, sat down, took his hammer and worked. And on the 4th day the kettle was whole. The woman, he said, she had to weep. She embraced me. She said I'd saved her life, not the kettle, her life. Because this kettle for her was life, was the memory of her mother, of her grandmother, of everyone who'd used it, everyone who'd cooked in it, everyone who'd loved with it. "The sound," he said, and his eyes lit up. "The sound is the best. When you strike metal with the hammer, not with force, but with understanding, it sounds like music. Every strike is a note, and when you have enough notes, when you have enough strikes, then the kettle becomes what it should be, and it sounds like a song." He took his hammer in hand and showed me how to work with it. "You have to work with your heart," he said, "not with strength. The hammer, it's only an extension of yourself, of your soul. And the metal, it answers. The copper, the iron, it answers to love, answers to understanding. I listen while I work, listen with my ears, listen with my hand, listen with my belly. I hear where the hole is, where the problem is, how to heal it. And then I work, strike by strike, note by note, until the song is complete. And the metal, it sings back. It thanks me." I asked him what he'd do if he couldn't be a tinsmith anymore. He looked at me as if the question made no sense. "I'll always be a tinsmith," he said with conviction. "Even if nobody needs kettles repaired anymore, even if the trade dies, even if the world forgets, I'm still a tinsmith. This isn't just work, not just a job. This is who I am. This is my name, my life, my voice in the world, my reason for existing. I'm not just a man. I'm a tinsmith. And that title? It's sacred to me. It's my soul. All my life, he said, I've wanted nothing else. I started when I was 16. My father taught me. And in all these years, over 60 years, I haven't regretted a single day. Every kettle I repaired was a part of me. Every hole I healed was my healing. And when I'm old, when I can't work anymore, when my hands no longer function, I'll still be a tinsmith. Nobody can take that from me. The craft is in my bones, in my blood, in my soul. That's immortal, as long as I live. And perhaps even after. My grandfather was a tinsmith, he told me, and his gaze grew distant, nostalgic. And his father and his grandfather, probably going back 100 years, perhaps more. That's tradition, lineage, family, all tinsmiths. We all traveled from village to village, all carried the same hammer, all played the same song on the metal. But my children, no, they don't want to be tinsmiths. They want other things, doctors, teachers, other professions. And that's all right, I understand. The world changes and young people follow new paths. But when I die, this trade will die, with me, with my hands, with my knowledge, with my songs. His voice grew sad, wistful. And the world will have a little less music. The kettles will no longer hear the song of repair. They'll simply stay broken, will be forgotten, will be thrown away, without honor, without respect, without the chance to live again. The train drove through the Hungarian countryside. Green fields, old villages, little houses that still looked old, still traditional. The man leaned his head against the window and his eyes grew weak, tired, but still bright, still alive. In Szeged, there's still a village, he said softly, with many old houses, with people who are as old as I am, who still believe in the old way. Perhaps they'll need me. Perhaps they'll have a kettle that needs repair, a kettle with history, with love. And I'll take my tool and I'll repair as I've always repaired, with all my heart, with all my life. He sighed deeply. That's all I need, a kettle, a hammer, and the hope that someone still believes that repair is possible, that love is possible. And it will sound like a song, like always. Ta-dam, ta-dam, tom. The hammer and the kettle, together. One last music, forever. I met a woman on a train from Kesteli to Szufok by Lake Balaton. It was autumn, and the vineyards on the shore were golden, orange, red. The woman was middle-aged, with quiet eyes and hands that smelled of wine, not like wine from a bottle, but like real, fermenting wine, still in process. She introduced herself as a winemaker. My husband and I, we have a wine cellar, old, over 100 years, right on the shore. And I run the cellar now. I look after the wine every day, every single day. She told me about the cellar. Deep underground, cool, dark, perfect for wine. The barrels are large, made of oak, and in them the wine matures year after year, slowly, patiently. Wine is like a child, she said. You have to watch over it, but you mustn't interfere too much. You have to trust that nature is right. You make the conditions correct, the temperature, the humidity, the darkness, and then you let the wine be, and it grows, it ripens, it becomes better and better. She showed me a photograph she carried in her pocket, an old photograph, yellowed at the edges, of a large cellar with stone vaults that looked like the ribs of some great creature. My grandfather built the cellar, she said quietly, with his own hands, with the stones he brought from the mountains. The photograph is 50 years old. The cellar is exactly the same today. Nothing has changed. The stones are still the same. The barrels are still the same. The darkness is still the same. Only the wine gets older. Only I get older. I go down into the cellar every morning, she said, and I check the barrels. I open the cellar door to check the temperature. I smell the containers to know how the fermentation is progressing. I count the barrels, though the number's always the same. 38 barrels, 38 universes. And sometimes I just sit there in the cellar in the darkness, and I listen to the wine. You can hear it if you sit still, the soft sound of fermentation, life unfolding. It's like music, it's like prayer. It's like the voice of my grandfather telling me that the work is good, that patience heals everything, that time is our friend, not our enemy. The lake, she said. Lake Balaton. It's my life. My father was a winemaker, my grandfather too. The family has always been connected to wine, to this lake, to this earth. And I'll be no different. Even if the modern world says these are old methods, that you need machines, that everything must go faster, I don't believe it. I believe that good wine needs time and love. Her voice grew even quieter. I had to lean forward to hear her, though the train was relatively quiet. The cellar is my comfort, she said. When the world gets too loud, when people disappoint me, when I don't know who I am anymore, when I'm lost, then I go into the cellar and the world becomes simple. Temperature, humidity, time, these are the only things that matter. The wine doesn't care about problems. The wine isn't cruel. The wine waits. The wine trusts me, and I trust the wine. That's a love that needs no words. She pulled out a small bottle from her pocket. This is wine from 3 years ago, she said, and it was a deep red, almost black red. This wine was with me in the cellar, in darkness, in coolness, for 3 years. And now it's ready. It's perfect. It won't be older, won't be better. Now is the moment. And when someone drinks this wine, they'll understand that time, that real time, is something precious. The wine cellar is my sanctuary, she said softly. Not in the religious sense, but in the sense that it's the place where I find myself. When the world outside gets too loud, when too much is happening, when I'm sad, I go into the cellar, and in the darkness, in the coolness, with the smell of wine, I'm whole again. I'm me again. She looked out across Lake Balaton, and her eyes grew moist. Not with tears, but with a kind of understanding. My daughter, she said, she doesn't want to take over the cellar. She doesn't want to be a winemaker. She wants to go to the city, have a modern job, and I understand that. I'm not angry. But I'm sad. The family will change. The tradition will end. And one day, someone else will stand in that cellar. Or the cellar will simply be closed. And life will go on, and nobody will know that here, under these stones, there was love. That here, life slowed down. That here, time lost its power. But then she said something that surprised me, something that sounded like a small hope. But you know, she said, perhaps that's all right too. Perhaps that's the way of things. The world doesn't need all cellars. The world doesn't need all old methods. Perhaps the world only needs one moment, a single moment, when someone understands that love and patience and time are precious. And if I give space to that moment, if I make this wine, then I've done enough. Then the world can go on, and it will be all right. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Her sadness was also a form of acceptance. She knew the truth, that all things end, that traditions die, that the world changes. but she would still go down every morning into the cellar. She would care for the wine as if it would go on forever. That's the wisdom I understood in that moment, not to fight against transience, but to honor it by acting with love nonetheless.
"Perhaps," I said, "your daughter will return one day. Perhaps she'll one day understand what this love means. Traditions don't always end. Sometimes they only sleep. Sometimes they wait for another generation to awaken them." She smiled weakly and nodded. "Perhaps," she said. "But I won't wait for perhaps. I'll love the cellar as if I know it will be forever. That's the only thing I can do." She leaned back in her seat, and we sat in silence for a while. The train carried on. Lake Balaton glittered outside in the light, and I thought that this woman, with her quiet eyes and her hands that smelled of wine, was perhaps one of the few people I'd ever met who truly knew what matters. Not success, not money, not even tradition for its own sake, but the ability to do something with love, knowing it won't be forever. That's a kind of courage not many have. The train approached Suffolk, and the woman looked out across Lake Balaton, the crystal clear water glowing gold in the autumn light. "My wine cellar is waiting for me," she said, and her voice was full of love. "And tomorrow I'll go back down again, and I'll check the barrels, and I'll listen, and I'll know that everything is right, that the wine is growing, that time is working, that patience has won in the end. And that's enough. That's all I need. The lake, the cellar, the wine, the old time. Ta-dam, ta-dam. Into the darkness, into the coolness, into sleep, where the barrels still turn, forever, gently."
I met the forester on a train through the Bavarian forest, on the line from Passau to Zwiesel. It was autumn, and the forest was ablaze with colors. Not the modest yellows and browns you usually see, but a wild, exuberant firework of red and gold and orange, as though someone had taken all the colors in the world and scattered them over the trees. The train passed slowly through this sea of color, and I couldn't stop gazing out the window. It was so beautiful. He sat opposite me, a large man with a broad back and a face weathered by wind and weather like old leather. His hair was grey, almost white, and he wore it short, almost military. Along with a green jacket that had seen so many seasons, it was hardly green anymore, more the color of moss on stone. At his belt hung a small pair of binoculars, and his boots were the sort you don't buy but grow into, heavy and solid and full of stories. He noticed how I was looking at the forest and said, very quietly, as though he was speaking to the trees rather than to me, 50 years I've walked through this forest, every day, in every weather, and it still surprises me. Every time I think I know it, it shows me something new. A mushroom I've never seen, a bird whose call I don't know, a light falling between the trees just as though someone placed it exactly there. The forest forgets nothing, he said, but it hides much, and shows it only to those patient enough. He told me about his mornings in the forest. At 5, he said, I'm out there, before the sun rises, when the forest is still sleeping. That's the best time, because then you can hear how it wakes. The first birds, beginning to sing, still hesitant, still uncertain, as though they had to find their voices. Then more, ever more, until the whole forest sings in 100 different ways, in 100 different pitches, and between them the silence, which is never really silent, the rustle of a leaf, the crack of a branch, the dripping of dew falling from the needles. "This silence," he said, "it's louder than any city. You just have to learn to hear it." He told me about the deer he sees every morning, at the same place, at the same time. "They know me," he said. "They know I mean them no harm. They lift their heads when I come, look at me with their great, dark eyes, and then lower their heads again and go on grazing. That's the greatest compliment an animal can pay a human," he said. "Not to see you as a threat, to accept you as part of the forest. That takes years, decades. You must walk like the forest walks, breathe like the forest breathes, slowly, evenly, without haste, without surprises." He told me about a tree, his oak, as he called it, a pedunculate oak, 300 years old, standing in a clearing, so broad and so mighty that its shadow could have covered a whole herd. Its trunk was so thick that 3 men couldn't encircle it, and its crown was so dense you could stand under it dry in the rain. He visited this oak every day for 30 years, sat beneath it, his back against the trunk, and simply listened to the wind in the leaves, to the birds in the branches, to the creaking of the wood as the trunk moved in the wind, ever so slightly, ever so slowly, like an old man stretching. "The forest forgets nothing," he said again, and this time it sounded like a secret he was trusting me with. "Every tree remembers everything that's happened near it. The summers that were hot and the winters that were cold, the storms that bent it and the stillness after, the people who sat beneath it and the animals that lived in it. It's all written there, in the growth rings, in the bark, in the way the branches grow. You just have to be able to read." I asked what the forest had taught him over all those years, and he thought for a while, folded his hands on his knees, those great, quiet hands that had planted so many trees and cleared so many paths, and said that everything is connected, that nothing is alone. The tree needs the fungus underground that gives it nutrients. The fungus needs the tree, which gives it sugar. The bird needs the tree for its nest. The tree needs the bird, which spreads its seeds. Everything is connected. Everything gives and takes. Everything bears and is born. The forest isn't a place, you see. The forest is a relationship, an endless, ancient relationship between millions of living things, all depending on each other and all there for each other. That's what the forest taught me, that you can't be alone, that you're always part of something greater, even if you can't see it. He got off at Zwiesel, adjusted his binoculars, and walked away, with the long, steady stride of a man used to walking over roots and moss. And I watched him disappear into the forest, which lay already in darkness, so naturally, as though he were going home. And perhaps he was. The forest forgets nothing. I carry that sentence with me. The connectedness of all things, the silence that's louder than any city, the patience of oaks that wait 300 years and never tire. The train carries on, and outside, the trees stand like dark sentinels in the night, and the rattle of the wheels sounds like footsteps on a forest path, quiet and rhythmic. And the wind coming through the window smells of resin and moss
and earth, and my eyes grow heavy, and I sink deeper into the forest of dreams, where everything is connected and nothing is alone. The rattle of the wheels has a particular rhythm tonight, you see. The way the train leans into the curves holds you gently in your seat, and suddenly I'm back, so many years ago, in a sleeper car between Paris and Basel that winter, and I'm thinking of the man who guided those nights. It was 1954, and this attendant, his name was Henri, wore the dark blue uniform like a second skin. His hands were rough from constantly gripping door handles, from pulling bed covers, from opening and closing 100 doors every night. I was young then, perhaps 30, and couldn't sleep because I was nervous about my first long journey after the war. Henri came in, not loudly, but simply there, as if he'd always been standing in the corridor, and he carried a confidence that only someone who'd done this work their whole life could carry. "You're not sleeping," he said, not as a question, but as an observation. And I said, "Yes, that's right. It's difficult. My heart still pounds with excitement." And Henri simply sat on the edge of my bed. Back then, he was allowed to do that. Or perhaps it broke all the rules, but he did it. And the authority in his gesture told me no one would contradict him. He said something to me I've never forgotten. The sleeper car isn't meant to put you to sleep. It's meant to carry your body while your mind travels. Your body is safe here, and everything else can happen. And as he said it, he opened the small light on the wall, not fully bright, but dimmed to that perfect brightness that just calms you, and showed me how to draw the curtain. "Look," he said, "the light, the curtain, the rhythm of the wheels, these are the instruments. We attendants, we learn to play these instruments like a musician plays his instrument. But the magic, it's greater than all the instruments together. The magic is that you're safe now in this night, at this height, and outside the whole world drifts past, and you can watch or sleep or weep or dream, and it's all right." Henri was only an attendant, but he was also an artist of his work. He knew every curve of the Paris-Basel route, the mountains, the villages, the rivers. He knew where the train sped up, where it slowed, where the bridges were especially long, where the tunnels suddenly took you into deep silence, and where the wheels sang their metallic song. And he used this knowledge to calm his passengers, not just with words alone, but with the rhythm of his steps in the corridor, with the timing of his checks, with the way he worked with the cradle of the train as if he'd taken lessons on some secret instrument. "People think," he told me, as he adjusted the window shade, and the way he did it was so gentle, so precise, as if he were moving a fragile work of art, that they have to sleep themselves. But really, the train sleeps them. The train is the cradle, and we're just the hand that rocks them gently back and forth, night after night, year after year. He smiled as if telling a great joke, but it wasn't a joke. It was the truth of his whole career, the sum of everything he'd learned traveling the Paris-Basel route hundreds of times. And I suddenly understood why people slept so differently in the sleeper car. Some fought against the rhythm, as if the train were trying to rob them. Others surrendered to it like a child carried by his father. And Henri was the father to all these people. He knew his role not just in his mind, but in his hands, in his rhythm, in the way he ordered the night. Compartment by compartment, window by window, breath by breath. I saw him during those few nights I spent on this train. He came regularly, not to check on me, but to make sure I was well, that I was beginning to understand, that I was in safe hands. He brought me warm water for tea, though that wasn't his job, and I understood that this was a kind of ritual for him, his way of showing every passenger they mattered.
He whispered the names of the stations we passed to me, as if entrusting me with secrets, personal details of a long friendship. Strasbourg, Colmar, Mulhouse. And every name had weight in Henri's voice, as if every station had its own little story, its own small relationship with him and this route.
"The night is for us attendants," he told me once. "What the day is for other people. I'm more at home in this night between Paris and Basel than in my own house. My family, they understand that. They know the train needs me, and that's why they love me too." And I saw in his face that he truly meant it, that this work wasn't just a profession for him, but a kind of calling, a way of showing the world love, one night after another. The last night with Henri was special. The train was running slow, there were some delays, and rather than complaining, Henri told me the night was longer, that he had more time with me, more time to show me everything. He showed me how the train moved in the mountains, how the air came through the ventilation, how moonlight broke into different colors depending on which windows we passed. It was as if he wanted to give me all his knowledge in a single night. On the last morning, as the train pulled into Basel and the sun was just rising, the Alps golden in the light, Henri stood in the corridor and asked me how I'd slept, and I told the truth. I'd slept like a child, better than ever before, and I'd dreamed wonderfully. And he nodded as if that were the only result that mattered, the only measure of a job well done. And it was clear he needed this confirmation to close his night. He said nothing more, just a quick bon voyage, and then he was already on his way to the other compartments, saying goodbye to everyone, a few words to each, a little of his warmth to all. I never saw Henri again. That was 1954, and the world has changed. The sleeper cars have changed, the attendants too. Everything has become more modern and faster and less warm. But I still think of him when I hear this rhythm, this gentle motion of the train into the curves, this hand that holds me and holds me and holds me. And I understand now that he wasn't just an attendant. He was an artist of letting go. He showed his passengers how to place all their trust in the night, how to surrender control and entrust themselves to the train, its wheels, its rhythms, its endless, gentle movements through the European night. The train carries on, now, here, and I feel the warmth of the compartment wrapping around me, wrapping around you. The rattle grows deeper and slower, and I think of Henri's hands, rough and tender at once, hands that laid 1,000 people into their cradles, that understood gentle strength is the greatest strength. And how comforting it was that there were people like him, people who understood that the greatest art on a train isn't driving, isn't the route, isn't the kilometers, but the making sleep, the care carrying, the trust waking. And now, slowly, soundlessly, warmly, the train carries you, just as Henri carried his passengers, night after night, safe, safe. A ringing in the distance, you see, and the way it pierces through the train, a telephone in another compartment. That wakes something old in me. It reminds me of an autumn evening on the Munich-Augsburg route, long ago, when I met an old woman who devoted her whole life to telephones. Her name was Greta, and she sat across from me in the compartment, a thin face with wrinkles like maps, silver hair pinned tightly into a hairstyle that must have been the same for decades. And the way her eyes focused. It was the focus of someone trained to hear multiple things at once, to monitor many lines, to distinguish many voices all simultaneously. Or perhaps it was simply the focus of someone who for 40 years, perhaps 50, had been trained to listen, only to listen, observed by no one, accustomed to playing her whole role without ever being in the spotlight,
She wore a brown coat of stiff fabric that seemed to have its own time, grown even thicker with age. And her hands were very still, very precise, like hands used to performing complex actions but with utmost slowness and care, as if each finger spoke a secret language. "You're tired," she said to me, not as a question, but as a statement from someone used to hearing truth in people. "I can see it in the way you sit, in the way your head has just started to fall forward, as if you could sleep right here, in this position, on this route, and nothing could wake you." I laughed and asked who she was, this woman reading strangers like an open book. "I'm just someone," said Greta, her voice very quiet, almost whispering, "who spent a long time listening to people. A long time, decades. At the telephone exchange, you don't just hear words, you hear the voice behind them, the truth in the pauses, the breath that says what lips cannot say. You know whether they love someone, whether they're afraid, whether they're telling the truth or lying, and you know it before they know it themselves." The telephone exchange. It had always been something of a mystery to me. That central switchboard, that black box in the town where 100 women sat and connected all the telephones, routed all the voices, controlled all the calls. 100 plugs, 100 movements, 100 tiny decisions per minute. And now Greta told me of this place as if describing a sanctuary of listening. It wasn't difficult in the sense of gravity, but it was intense. Every hour, every day, the same repetition that isn't repetition. "Number, please. Hold on. Your connection is being made." But in this repetition that repeats 1,000 times, you realize you're doing something incredibly important. You connect people who love each other, people who are far apart, people who need to communicate, people who just need a voice in the night, the last voice before they sleep, the first voice when they wake. "It was," said Greta, looking out the window at the dark fields we passed, the acres dark brown and still. "Like playing an instrument. Not piano, no. More like an organ, the organ in a church. Every plug, a note. Every connection, a note in a chord. Every mistake, a wrong note that might hurt people. And I was a musician without knowing it. I played a symphony of voices, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. And the composer wasn't me. The composer was love itself, pain itself, longing itself." She made a gesture with her hand as if pulling a plug, inserting it, withdrawing it again. And this gesture was so tender, so precise, that I instantly understood this movement was to her like breathing, like a heart beating, like thought itself. "People think," she continued, and her voice became very soft, as if sharing a great secret with me, "that the telephone operator is just a connector, simply someone pulling plugs. But we were the souls of connection. Without us, without the telephone girls, everyone would have remained alone. Every child calling to say good morning to his mother because the mother works in another city. Every lover wanting to hear his beloved's voice again after he's left. Every soldier making an enquiry. All of it went through us. All of it touched our hands, our ears, our heart, our flesh, our soul." And I saw tears in her eyes, but not sad tears. Rather, the tears of someone who knows she's been loved, indirectly, anonymously, through the way she was loved, through the voices that echoed in her. "I'm retired now," said Greta, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But my hands, they still remember, you see. Sometimes when I sit at the table, my fingers make this movement, pulling, inserting, pulling. It's automatic. It's like a prayer my body prays, even when my mind no longer thinks. And I understood she wasn't just telling me a story, but showing me her whole being, the sum of all her years, all reduced to this one movement, this small, tender, precise movement that had connected people. "What do you think of most?" I asked her. And Greta answered without hesitation, without thinking, as if she'd answered this question 1,000 times. "The silence. Not the silence when nobody called, no, but the tiny little silence between words, when two people loved each other but couldn't speak, only could breathe, together across hundreds of kilometers. That silence. I created it millions of times. Every time I created it by inserting the plug and then became motionless. And I played it millions of times, and each time it was different. Each time it was a little eternity, a little private eternity between two people I couldn't see, who didn't know I existed. And I was the guardian of that eternity. And suddenly I understood why she told me I was tired. She saw in me someone who also listens, who also catches hidden things, who also senses the hidden feelings in people's words. "The most important thing," she said, her eyes now open, intense, focused on my face, "is never the speaking. It's the listening, real listening. And if you listen well, then you don't fall asleep in the conversations, but you become part of them, a silent echo that carries the words, that carries the love, that carries the people." The train carried on, and we passed a station whose name I couldn't see from the window, and Greta leaned her head back and closed her eyes, slowly, peacefully. And I listened to the sounds, not to words, not to clear sounds, but to the tiny pauses between, to the way the wheels sang, to the small silence in the motion, to the breathing of the other passengers sleeping. And I understood that Greta hadn't just told me a story. She'd passed on her whole craft to me, this ability to hear, really to hear the things that aren't words. And now, in this night, I still hear the ringing in the distance, the little silence between the tiny eternity. And I see the hands of a woman who spent a whole career connecting people, plug after plug, voice after voice, heart after heart. Her whole heart in this work, in this night. And I sleep, gently, in the memory of her hands, warm, safe, connected. A window full of light. And suddenly, it reminds me of the screen of a cinema, you see, just as it looks when the film begins. And I'm back on the Berlin-Leipzig route, decades ago, in a compartment with an old man who devoted his whole life to the keys of a piano. His name was Dieter, and he looked as if music itself had shaped his face. His forehead had wrinkles like staff lines on a written page, deep wrinkles from years of concentration. His hands were large and expressive, still mobile despite his age. And his eyes. His eyes could read what others couldn't see. They looked into the distance, as if still gazing at an invisible screen. He wore an elegant suit of gray silk, old but carefully maintained, without a spot, pressed with love. And when he looked at me, he said, not asking me, but as if simply knowing, reading my heart, "You like music. I can see it in the way you breathe. As if you follow rhythm even when no music plays, as if you had an inner beat." I laughed in surprise, embarrassed, and said, "Yes, that's right, but how did you know? How can you see that?" And Dieter leaned back and told me of his work. 40 years, he said, 40 long years, He had sat in cinemas, in dark halls full of people, before a great screen where silent films played, black and white movements, soundless dramas, and he played the piano alongside. Not just played, that would have been far too simple, but wrote the music to the images, improvised in the moment while the film ran, while the actors moved, while light and shadow played. It was, he said, and his voice became very soft, very intense, the hardest and the most beautiful thing I ever did. Because you can't just play music, you have to hear the images. You have to see what's invisible. You have to become the emotion.
The silent film cinema, Dieter explained, his hands now in the air as if still playing, was not silent. That was the great misunderstanding. It wasn't silent. It was full of music, of my music, of the music I created. And that music wasn't predetermined, not recorded, not dead. It was alive. It was me, live, here. Every night a new premiere, the pianist telling the story by playing the emotions, note by note, creating the soul of the film with my keys, with my heart, with my hands. And I suddenly understood that his whole life wasn't a life as a musician, but a life as a translator. He translated silent movements into sound, soundless cries into melodies, facial expressions into harmonies, tears into discordance, light and shadow into the rise and fall of musical phrase.
"You see," said Dieter, and his voice became very quiet, as if confessing a great secret, a secret perhaps he'd never told anyone. The work of the silent film pianist is paradox. You play for something you don't hear, for a voice that doesn't exist, for people who hear no music except yours, who mix your sound with the film without realizing it's you. And you know that every time you play, every note is a little eternity you create, a little eternity that vanishes with the film when the film ends. The film runs over your piano, over your life, and if you play wrong, if you can't keep pace, if your heart doesn't beat with the film's rhythm, then the magic breaks, and people don't know why, but they feel it. And I asked him if he was afraid of playing a wrong note, if the pressure had broken him. "Afraid?" said Dieter, and laughed quietly, a sad, knowing laugh. Fear is a sin for a silent film pianist. Fear makes your fingers tremble. Fear makes your music fragile. Fear kills the magic. Instead, I had to rely on a deeper understanding, an understanding that only years could teach. That the music doesn't come from me, that I'm not the creator, but that the music flows through me, like light through transparent stone. That I'm only an instrument, just like the piano itself, a tool, and that the film, the story, the souls of the actors on screen, the faces, the tears, the dreams, they are the true composers. They write the music, and I only translate it into sound. "But then," said Dieter, and now I saw sadness in his face, but also something else, something that looked like peace. Came the talking pictures, and overnight my work became redundant. The pianist was no longer needed. The music was recorded, pressed into celluloid, preserved like dead fruit, and played for thousands of viewers in the same moment, everywhere at once, without me, without the piano, without the love. And we pianists of the silent film, we vanished. We became ghosts, like ghosts from a film that's ended, abandoned on the screen, no credits, no applause, just darkness. "I remember the last night," he said, and his voice became very small, very distant. It was a Chaplin film, a funny film, a film that made people laugh. And I played. I played as if it would go on forever. But I knew, deep in my fingers, that this was the last night. The film ran to its end. The music faded. The lights came up, and the people left the hall. And the owner, he came to me and said, no words, just a gesture of apology. The next film already had a soundtrack. The next film wouldn't need me. And I packed my notes together, my old notes that I'd constantly improvised over 40 years, and I left the cinema. I never returned. But Dieter wasn't bitter. On the contrary, as he told me this, something lit up in his eyes, a gleam that came from sorrow, but also from something deeper. That was the beauty, he said, and his hand touched my knee. That was the great lesson life gave me. In every moment of my life, with every note I played, every night, every premiere, I knew it wouldn't last. Nothing would last. That made it precious. That made it sacred. That made it true art. I didn't play for eternity. I played for that 1 hour, that one night, that one film, that one audience, that one projection. And then it was over, erased, forgotten. And tomorrow was a new film, a new story, new music I had to create from my fingers, again, once more, forever, until the whole cinema disappeared. The train moved on, slowly, very slowly, through the autumn night, and the trees outside were dark, as if the night itself were playing. And Dieter leaned back, his head tilted against the window. And he told me that sometimes he still hears the music he played on the piano before the great screens in dark halls full of breath. And that this music hasn't gone anywhere, hasn't been lost. It went into the night, into the space, into the hearts of people who listened, into the dreams of people who slept during the film. The best music, he said softly, is the music nobody hears anymore, but that everyone carries with them. The music that becomes part of life, invisible, unforgotten, eternal. And now, when I see a window full of light, like that window that drifts past me on this night, a glowing window in a dark house, I think of Dieter and his long hands on the keys. Think of 40 years of silent cinema. Think of the music he played. The music that isn't there, but the music of the moment, the music of transience. And the train. The train plays for me now, plays just as Dieter played, rattling, rolling, warm, into the night, into the darkness. And I fall asleep to a music only I hear, only I know. The music of memory, gently, safely, forever fading into the night. A light in the distance, far away, a checkpoint light, and the way it blinks. It reminds me of an autumn evening many years ago on the Plauenhof route, back when the world was still divided, and I met a woman working her last night at the border. Her name was Maria, and she sat in the compartment next to me in a dark green uniform, the old uniform of a state that wouldn't exist much longer. A round face that bore the marks of so many nights, so many decades of watchfulness, of extreme alertness, of attention that could never relent. Her hair was gray, pulled back severely, combed into the same style she'd probably worn for 20 years. Her eyes were pale blue, but not kind, not warm. They were the eyes of someone who'd learned to observe people like a scientist, to see their weaknesses, to smell their fear, to recognize their lies. She didn't say hello or good evening to me, but spoke directly, as if beginning an interrogation. This is my last night. Tomorrow the wall falls. Tonight people will tear down the wall, and from tomorrow there will be no more checkpoint, no more fence, no more border, only a road, both sides connected, as if there'd never been a separation. I didn't understand immediately what she meant, but Maria explained to me very slowly, as if speaking to a child. The wall falls tonight. The regime is ending. It's too late to change anything now. Everything we fought for, everything we labored for decades, it's over. It meant nothing. And we, us border guards, we have no place in the new world, the world without borders. We're guards of a border that tomorrow won't exist, a border that will be torn down like a crumbling wall. And I saw sorrow in her face, but it wasn't the sorrow of someone who'd lost. It was something deeper. It was the sorrow of someone losing their whole identity, their whole purpose, their whole reason for existing. "How long have you worked at the border?" I asked her. And Maria answered, not hesitating, but as if reciting statistics. "Since 1963, 26 years, my whole adult life, almost my entire life. The wall was built, and I was built alongside it, like a wall myself, a living barrier between two sides, a flesh and blood fence." She stared out the window, and I saw her looking at the landscape she knew so well, every curve, every tree, every stone, every spot in the forest where she'd have an eye. "Every night," she said, her tone oddly empty, "I walk the same path, I check the same fence, I hear the same sounds or the absence of sounds. I wait for the same thing, intruders, escape attempts, spies. Nothing ever comes, nothing. No escape attempt, no drama, no excitement, just routine. The same routine every night, 26 years. And you ask yourself, is this life? Is this meaning? The border isn't a line. The border is a culture of vigilance, a culture of fear, a culture that turns you into a machine." And Maria told me of her work, not with pride, but with a kind of tired acceptance. How to patrol the fence, how to hear when people try to escape, how to smell when people are near, how to know who can legally cross the border and who cannot. "It's," she said, "not so different from a conductor leading an orchestra. You have to know where everyone is, every fugitive, every spy, every threat. You have to maintain harmony, the false harmony of oppression. You have to prevent chaos from breaking out, people from fleeing, order from collapsing." And I understood that Maria, like all the people I met on my journeys, had an inner rhythm, an inner sense of order, but that this rhythm became a trap for her, a fetter, a prison. "But the order was wrong," said Maria quietly, very quietly, as if speaking into the past, not to me. "The border was wrong, completely wrong. We all knew it, us border guards, we knew it in our hearts. But we pretended it was right, that it was necessary for security, that without the border everything would be chaos, that everything would fall into anarchy. But now, on this last night, I understand that the border wasn't security, that the wall didn't protect us. The border was a prison of concrete and barbed wire. And I was the guard of my own prison. I was the prisoner, just like the people I stopped. "I remember a fugitive," she said, and her voice grew even deeper, even sadder. "A young man, perhaps 20 years old. He tried to cross the border one night, and I was there. My job was to stop him, and I did. I whistled, and the lights came on, and soldiers. We caught him, and he wept. I still see his face before me. His whole life was concentrated in that weeping. And I didn't ask myself then, I wasn't allowed to ask myself, why is this person weeping? I told myself, this is the enemy. This is the one who threatens our order. But tonight I see his face again, and I understand he wasn't the enemy. He was just someone who wanted to be free. And I was the one who stopped him. "Tomorrow," said Maria, and her voice was calm, but I saw her hands tremble. My uniform will mean nothing. Tomorrow people will be able to walk in both directions, free, without fear, without controls. Tomorrow there will be no more checkpoints, no more borders, no more border guards like me. Tomorrow, I won't exist anymore, not in this form, not with this identity, not with this purpose. I'll just be an old woman, a pensioner, a former border guard who devoted her whole career, her whole life, to maintaining a false order, an order that should never have existed. And I heard no bitterness in her voice, only deep sadness, but also something else. Relief, perhaps. The relief of someone realizing she can finally be free. But also fear, great fear of the unknown, of freedom, of the new world. The train moved on, slowly, through the dark night, and the landscape was invisible, but I felt we were approaching the border, approaching the checkpoint where Maria spent so many nights, where she patrolled the fence, where she kept watch, where she sacrificed her dreams. The train slowed even more, as if becoming respectful, the last train before the wall fell. And Maria said to me, her voice very calm, "Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me say goodbye to this night, to this border, to this wall that I called my purpose, my task, my life." And then she leaned her head back and closed her eyes, slowly, peacefully. And I saw she smiled, slightly, barely noticeably, but a smile nonetheless, the smile of someone finally able to let go.
And now, when I see a light in the distance, a checkpoint, a border, a crossing, I think of Maria and her 26 years. Think of the border that's no longer there. Think of the wall that fell, that connected people instead of dividing them. Think of the freedom that replaced the wall, the freedom they should have had all these years. And the train carries on, not through borders, not through checkpoints, but through the open night, the connecting night. And there are no more barricades, no more fear, no more vigilance, only the certainty that the earth becomes whole again, slowly, silently, warmly, liberated. A horse in a field, the way it stands beneath a tree, motionless, waiting. It reminds me of a spring morning long ago on the Osnabrück-Rhine route, when I met an old man whose whole life was lived on the back of a horse. His name was Friedrich, and he wore an old, dusty coat, gray and brown together, the color unrecognizable, completely destroyed by time. His hands were not those of a city man, not the hands of a writer or a clerk. They were the hands of someone who works with the earth, who works with horses, who works with reins, who works with wind and rain. Large hands, rough, scarred, calloused. His face was burned by the sun, dark from years of work beneath the open sky, from decades of riding without shelter. And his eyes had that special quality, the eyes of people who ride long distances, who cross plains. They are sharp and at the same time distant. They see detail and also the horizon. He said to me, not asking, but as if simply knowing, "You look out the window like someone who knows how to trust time. You're not impatient, you don't fidget. You understand that traveling isn't about hurrying, that traveling is meditation, a practice of patience." I asked him, surprised, how he could know that. How could he see it in my eyes? And Friedrich told me of his work as a postman on horseback, work he'd done his whole life, over 50 years, from 1920 to 1970, a whole life in the saddle. The postman on horseback, he said, his tone nostalgic, reflective, isn't just a worker, not just a postal employee. The postman on horseback is an artist of patience, a master of trust.
every route from village to village, from house to house, across fields and forests. That's a small journey, a small odyssey, a small story. And with every ride, with every day, you learn that speed isn't the fast way. That true speed is a state of trust, a state of trusting your horse, the road, time itself.
Friedrich told me of his roots in Westphalia, the long distances between Osnabrück and Rhine, the villages, Pluggen, Lotte, Bad Iburg, that he visited. Every day, the same villages, the same houses, the same people he saw his whole life, every year, until they grew older, until they died, until new people moved into their houses. I knew every house, he said. I knew the color of the windows, the direction of the door, the name of the dog at every farmyard. I knew every family. I knew when they expected letters from relatives. I knew their greatest joys, a wedding, a child, a letter from a son far away. And I knew their sorrows. When someone died, when a letter came with bad news. I knew it before the family knew it, because I smelled the letter before I delivered it. I felt it in my hands, the weight of bad news. And I suddenly understood that Friedrich was like a kind of priest of his route, a priest without a church, a guardian of human connection, a carrier and witness of messages that changed lives, brought tears, awakened joy. "The horse," said Friedrich, and he smiled as if speaking of an old friend, almost a brother, wasn't just an animal, not just a tool. The horse was my partner, my accomplice, my life. The horse knew which route we'd take before I knew. The horse knew which family had a child, which family was grieving, which family expected letters. The horse knew every path, every stone, every hole in the road, every curve, the way a musician knows a melody. The horse wasn't just patient when I had to stop, when I had to deliver a letter, when I had to wait for the horse to drink, to eat. The horse waited for orders, for signals. And I trusted the horse, the way you trust a child, the way you trust life, unconditionally. "Over the years," said Friedrich. His voice grew very quiet. "I lost my interest in speed, lost the hurry. Other postmen, the younger ones, they wanted to go faster, wanted to deliver more letters per day, wanted to shorten their route, wanted more efficiency, more profit. But I found that slowness was the true luxury, the true wealth. Slowness means you have time to observe, time to see the world. You see when a house changes, when the garden is tended, when it falls into disrepair. You see when a child grows up, from birth to marriage to having their own child. You see when people grow older, slowly, year by year, until they die, and you're the last to see them when you bring the last post. And the letters aren't the work. The letters are just the reason to ride. The real work is the riding itself, the observing, the quiet connection with the landscape, understanding that time isn't fast, but slow, vertical, directed toward the earth. My horse, his name was Kaiser. He was a large black stallion with white blazes on his forehead and legs. Kaiser wasn't just a horse. Kaiser was my therapist, my counselor, my best friend. When I was sad, when a child from one of my regular households died, when a family broke apart, when I carried letters that brought sorrow or war, Kaiser felt it. Kaiser slowed his pace. Kaiser breathed deeply as if saying, "Yes, I know. I'm here. We ride through this sorrow together." And I told Kaiser everything, my secrets, my dreams, my hopes. And Kaiser answered with a snort, with a slight movement of his head, as if understanding, as if giving me courage. "Then came the war," said Friedrich, and his voice became very quiet, barely audible. "And everything changed.
The routes were interrupted. The roads weren't safe anymore. Some houses I visited no longer existed, were destroyed. The families had fled or been killed. Some people I knew, they were gone. They never came back. And after the war, when it was all over, the world wanted to be faster, wanted everything faster, wanted cars, lorries, airplanes. The sky became the road. Nobody wanted the postman on horseback anymore. Nobody had time for such slowness, such patience. My profession disappeared, like an old film being played, and then darkness. The machine switched off, and silence. And the horse grew old, and I grew old, and we both lost ourselves. Not to the world, but only to forgetting. The train moved on, slowly, through the spring night, and Friedrich leaned back, his eyes closed. "But I regret nothing," he said softly. "The years with the horse, those were a school, a university, an education in slowness, in attentiveness, in love, in the way to see the world. And I carry that with me still, everywhere I go, everywhere I sleep. I'm older now, I can't ride anymore, but my heart still rides every day, the same routes, visits the same houses, in dreams. And the horse is still with me, warm, reliable, patient. And now, when I see a horse in a field, like that horse drifting past me, I think of Friedrich and his life in the saddle. Think of the letters he carried. Think of slowness, real work. And the train is faster than the horse, but it carries me with the same gentleness, the same patience. And I trust the train as Friedrich trusted his horse. And we ride, slowly, silently, through the landscape. Warm, safe, home. I'm at the Goldsmith on a train on the Pforzheim-Karlsruhe route, a line that runs through the heart of German jewelry, on a cold winter evening when snow began to fall, and he was tall, with snow-white hair, and he had the hands of someone whose whole work, whose whole life lives in the fingertips, in every movement, in every gesture. His name was Otto, Goldsmith for 60 years, and he still wore his old workshop apron, dark brown from years of gold dust, from years of files and blowtorch, from years of love for the material. "I'm too old now," Otto said to me, not as a complaint, not as sorrow, but as a simple statement, truth without anger. "My hands can't do what they once did. They tremble. They tremble when I engrave a line, when I set a stone. But I can't stop. I don't know how to stop. The ring in my pocket, I carry it with me everywhere. A ring I couldn't finish because my hands began to tremble, just as I wanted to engrave the final notch. That was 2 weeks ago. And I think I know that was my masterpiece. That was my last ring. My swan song. My farewell." Otto told me of his workshop in Pforzheim, that wonderful city in the Black Forest, famous for centuries for its jewelry craft. The city where generations of jewelry artists had their workshops side by side, craft upon craft upon craft. 60 years, he said, 60 long years he'd spent there, every single day at his little table with his tools, his files, his light, his blowtorch, with his gold, with his whole heart. "A ring," said Otto, and his voice became very quiet, very intense, very dreamy, "is not simply a piece of metal, not simply a piece of jewelry, not simply an ornament. A ring is an engagement. A ring is an eternal promise of duration, of faithfulness, of eternity. A ring is a whole philosophy, a whole world view about love and constancy, about the hope that something can last forever. And when you forge a ring, when you form it with your hands, when you smooth it, when you polish it until it gleams, when you warm it with the blowtorch and then cool it in water, then you're not just making jewelry. You're making a memory. You're making a soul. You're making a promise that will be worn for a lifetime, that flows through generations, that never dies.
My workshop, said Otto, and his gaze became almost visionary. Smells of gold and heat, and of something even older, of time itself. The smell of melting fire, of glowing metal. It mixes with the smell of oil for the machines, of fine gold dust that settles everywhere, even in my hair, under my fingernails. Some mornings, when I wake up, my pillow smells of gold. That's funny, isn't it? My whole life smells of my work, and I wouldn't want to change it. The scent is like a quiet promise that my life has meaning, that my hands have done something important. And Otto leaned back against the train window, and I could see he was working with his eyes closed, his fingers simulating the movements of engraving again and again, an unconscious echo of his life's work. There are moments, said Otto, and now he opened his eyes again and looked directly at me. There are moments in my life, in my work, when I finish a ring, when I finally see it complete, when it gleams, when the gold shows its full beauty, then I know that the ring and I are not alone. The ring and I, we have become something together. An artist and his work. These are not two separate things. It's one. It's a unity. And this ring, it will always carry a part of me, will always carry my hands, my love, my breath, my thought, wherever it goes, wherever it lives. I asked Otto whether he'd ever regretted dedicating his whole life to this one thing, his whole existence for the ring, never learned another craft, never tried another life, and he shook his head very slowly. That's not a question of regret or not regret, he said. That's simply who I am. I'm a goldsmith the same way a tree is an oak or a rose is a rose. You can't say that the oak regrets not being a beech. You can't say that my life was wrong just because it was limited, focused, deep rather than broad. People today, they always want to try everything, go everywhere, experience everything. But true mastery, true beauty, that doesn't come from variety. It comes from absolute dedication, from absolute concentration, from love so deep you forget everything else. And Otto showed me his hands, slowly. Large, rough, scarred from work, from daily contact with hot metal, with blowtorches, with saws and files, but with an extraordinary, almost magical gentleness in the fingertips, a tender softness that could only come from 60 years of daily work, 60 years of love for the material, for the craft. These hands, he said, and he regarded them slowly, as if seeing them for the first time, really, as if discovering himself. These hands have made thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of rings. Every ring was different, unique, never two exactly alike. Each had a small deviation, each had a small signature of me. Every ring was a meditation, a quiet prayer, a deep conversation between me and the gold, between my hands and the material. And I always knew, every time, with every ring, that this ring, this gold that I took in my old hands, would change a life, would shape the future of two people, would represent the love of the world. A woman would receive this ring, and in the moment she put it on, the moment she slipped it over her finger, everything else would disappear, would become unimportant, would be forgotten. Only this ring would exist in that moment, only this promise, only this love, only this gleam, only this gold that I created with my hands, with my whole heart.
The work of the goldsmith, said Otto as the train moved, slowly, very slowly, through the deep winter night, through fields covered in snow, through a sleeping Germany, is work of transformation, alchemical work, work of the soul. Gold comes to me as a lump, as raw material, formless, without meaning, soulless, and I transform it with my hands, with my tool, with my patience. I make it beautiful. I give it form. I give it life. I give it soul. I make people weep when they see it. Not from sadness, but from pure beauty, from being moved, because it's so beautiful, because it represents their love, because it represents the eternal hope that something precious, something truly beautiful, something truly eternal exists in a world that dies every day, that perishes every day. And this ring that I form from gold, it will live longer than I, longer than my loved ones, longer than my memory. It will gleam for centuries. Time, said Otto, and his gaze became distant, as if he were looking into another world, is not fast for the goldsmith. Time is slow, very slow. A single line to engrave, that takes an hour. But this hour, it's the most important of all the work. This line will be there forever. This line will carry eternity. And therefore, you can't be hasty. You must be slow. You must be present. You must be completely there in this moment, with this gold, with this line, with this love. And Otto leaned his head back against the window, his eyes closing slowly. Tomorrow, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow I'll give up the workshop. A younger man will take my place, will use my tools, will work my gold. And my hands, they'll finally rest. After 60 years, finally rest. And he was silent for a long moment, and I heard only the rattle of the train. But the rings, he continued. His voice grew louder again, full of strength. The rings I've made, all these rings, thousands, tens of thousands, those will be worn forever. Those will outlive generations. Those will be loved, looked at, worn daily, without anyone noticing that I made them. And that's enough for my life. That's more than enough. That's everything I ever needed. To know that my hands, that my work, that this gold lives forever, gleams forever, means love forever. And now, in this night, while the train travels through the winter night, I think of Otto and his hands. I think of all the rings he formed from gold. I think of the love that lives in every ring, warm, golden, eternal. And I fall asleep to a rhythm that sounds like the beating of a blowtorch, warm, golden, safe.